Thank you for coming to our presentation. My name is Rachel Skafidas, and I'm one of the senior color designers for DuraSeal. And along with me, I have Toby Merrill and Chuck. They are both our contractor specialists. So I'm going to start out talking about our 6 new colors and the trends and how we came about them. And then our lovely guys over here are going to take you through our cerusing effect. Okay? So let's take a start. So have any of you guys been to our booth yet, booth number 1201? Is anybody? I think I recognize a few faces from seeing you there. So we do have all of our new colors painted out or brushed out onto a nice wood flooring that you guys need to come over and take a look. So colors are integral to our color leadership within the business. We took a look at where design and color have come from and where design and color are going. We bolstered our neutral section with our warm rustic grays, but we didn't forget the time-worn grays that we needed as well too. And now I want to go through the story of how we forecasted them. Here's a look at our 6 new colors. We are showing them on both red oak and white oak. The red oak's on the left and the white oak is on the right. And our first trend is titled Simple. So the color bar that is below that, those are some paint colors that you may see with this trend in the industry. So Simple, we are living with a mindset that's both thoughtful and restful. We want to detox from our digital lives, right? So how many of you, when you go home, you want to just put your phone away, just have quiet time, not look at it, you don't have that blue light right in your face all the time. Simple is also nature inspired, weathered and handcrafted and raw textures we see in there. And imperfections are embraced, right? So things don't have to be perfect, and that's okay. We are also embracing, denoting cared for and lived in spaces, right? So things don't have to be just so. It's okay that they're lived in. It's okay that it looks that way. We like that comfortableness. Here we have the colors for Simple. So we have our new color, Rustic Beige, and then we have our Warm Gray. Both of these colors are warm and lighter in tone, and they provide a very comforting feeling in the home. Here's some slides. So we want to enjoy the slowness within this trend, right? So this is a time that you're going to take. You're going to sit back, maybe with a cup of coffee, maybe with tea, just relax in the quiet. In kids' rooms, what we're seeing is that people are definitely going more for the neutral wall colors and want those neutral gray tone flooring now, because we're going back to some of the old school toys that are bright and popular in color, and those are going to pop. So we don't often want to overstimulate some of our little ones. Also, fabrics are featuring wood grains. I don't have a pair on now, but if you stop by our booth, we do have some nice DuraSeal socks that have wood grain on them. Pretty fun. Go and use them. They're great to use on the job site. And here we have, so the image on the left is just showing that while we don't want to be inundated with technology, it's still a life force, right? We have to have it. Everybody has a cell phone, at least one of them. Most of us have 2 or 3. And so here's showing how you can have the electronics where you have the electrical power outlet inside of a drawer. So while we still need the electric, we don't need to see it all the time. And then bringing nature back in. You'll see in all 3 of our trends, bringing nature back into the home is definitely something that has been up and coming and still going forth. Just taking a walk around the show, I noticed that everybody has some form of nature within their booths and or their color collections. Everybody's just talking about nature. We're all going back to that. And again, here's a slide showing how we want to go back to the basics, right? We want to get back to living the basics and crafting and wanting to get back to time-honored traditions and not just seeing it on TV or on social media. You don't want to just see great places that people have gone. You want to go to those places that people have gone. Also, how many of you have heard of the Condo Effect? It's the Japanese art of decluttering. And it's spelled with a K, not C like condominium. And no, it wasn't taken after a certain reality family that spells everything with a K. So this effect is great. Marie Kondo, who started this, has this quote where you look at something, and if it doesn't bring you joy, you get rid of it, right? So I've been trying to do this, going through stuff in my home, looking at it, and just getting rid of it. So it's getting rid of those things and going back to the basics. So now onto our second trend. So our second trend is titled Hush. It bridges both the past and future, natural and industrial, offering a fresh approach to design driven by simplicity and minimalism. Metallics are noted in this trend, but they're more on the industrial side. So what we're seeing is a lot of silvers, the entire gamut of silver, going from the brushed, polished chrome all the way down to industrial silver that we're seeing. And then here are two new colors that fall into Hush. So we have our silvered gray and our dark gray. This dark gray is amazing in person. So is the silvered gray. You guys need to stop by and come see these. So on this slide, a lot of the design in this trend is what I call Scandi 2.0. So many of you have probably heard of the Scandinavian design movement. It's based on minimalism. So as I call it Scandi 2.0, it's kind of moving forward from that, and it's warming up a little bit. It still has the minimalism, but the colors have more of a warm base. Even though we see shades of blue, the blues have more warm bases with them. So you're gonna see those mixed in with the gray flooring. There's still connection to the outdoors, and time-worn, salvaged wood and metal are key accents. Clean lines, and it's more of a livable palette and functional versus how when the original Scandi movement started, it was much more clean lines, modern, and often had a cold feel to the room. And then here again, so adding in metals, another thing that we're seeing is the oxidation or the time-wornness of the metals. And also black muntin bars on windows. How many of you guys have seen that? Like that has been popping up everywhere. And that definitely creates a little bit more of an industrial feel. And then again, in design terms, mid-century modern design with clean lines and minimal ornamentation is part of the Hush trend as well. And now onto our third trend, which I'm calling Moditional. It's the perfect combination of modern and traditional. What happens when we want to see both of those and combine them together? Our two colors that we have here are Aged Barrel and Heritage Brown. Both of these colors are warmer and they're deeper. They often provide a feeling of legacy, but there's enough of a gray tone that they feel modern as well. So again, it's that perfect combination of traditional and modern. Here we have some images that are kind of showcasing this trend. So this trend is inspired more by mainstream media and TV. So the appearance that it looks effortless and lived in, but yet everything was considered and placed where it was. Using deep wood tones and warm off-whites, black wrought iron, and just a hint of sparkle upgrades this look to be a little bit more fun, I guess. So like in the image on the top right, you have the bright polished copper lighting. So adding that to a room, or adding in the chandelier in the image on the top left. Mixing of metals and fabrics that originally weren't thought of being put together is definitely in this trend as well. So it does have a little bit of an eclectic vibe. And then we have what I'm sure every one of you guys have seen, the modern farmhouse movement, right? Who here has not heard of Joanna Gaines? Because I'm sure every one of you have heard of that, and I'm sure everybody has asked you, that they want that modern farmhouse feel that, she creates. So with her, this movement has gained a lot of traction, and we feel, it's kind of, up there right now. It has a mix of rustic and traditional, eclectic and industrial. So it's mixing in those metals, it's mixing in the warm, rustic wood tones, and it's definitely, they all have a grade version of them. And then here's a look at our 6 new colors again. And again, please stop by our booth. We have a nice wood flooring laid down so you can see them in person. And we also have handouts as well too that I believe they handed out to you guys here. So it has all the information about that.
So now we're going to talk about cerusing, which, does anybody know what cerusing is? Does anybody not know what cerusing is? Does anybody have hands to put up? Okay. So cerusing at its simplest is making the grain white, kind of opposite of how we traditionally think of color on wood. So we have our display up here that goes from our 4-step process. The raw wood, we do homemade iron acetate. Has anybody ever made iron acetate? Yes. Is there anybody that doesn't know what iron acetate is? Iron acetate is a homemade mixture. It's just vinegar and steel wool. When you put them together, there's a chemical reaction that occurs. Vinegar is acetic acid. Steel wool is iron, so the iron acetate is the combination of them, and the resulting reaction will turn some woods a darker shade of gray or black, and it reacts with the tannins in the wood. So white oak is high in tannins, so it's generally the one that we're talking about, although some of the images we have for you are on red oak as well, because you can get a different but also nice effect on it as well. So this is the raw wood that's been treated with the iron acetate, and then we have where we burnished in a coat of nutmeg stain. And so the burnishing system is not traditional stain application. Most people are going to either be hand applying and hand wiping, hand applying and buffing off, buffing on and buffing off. That seems to be the growing trend. But when you burnish, you need to apply the stain and then burnish it with steel wool. And that technique goes back 60, 70, 80 years and has largely been forgotten about in our modern flooring world. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the final two steps are we add in the white using our Country White Quick Coat, and then it can be top coated as well with our 2-component water-based Max. So we have some quick video to show you, and actually we're gonna ceruse this panel first. So Chuck's gonna step up. We normally do this with a buffer, but due to the size of our panel and logistics of getting things here, we're gonna just go ahead with hand application. So Chuck's gonna start with the edges. And the first part of this is just getting the color in there. We do the edges by hand and the middle with a buffer, and we then apply the middle with the buffer. We just pour it through and burn it and buff it on. Go back. Yeah. I need dry time. At this point, we'd typically switch to the buffer, but again, due to the size of the panel, we're just going to continue by hand. So this panel's already been treated with iron acetate and then nutmeg stain. Neutral and nutmeg seem to work the best. It made sense to me at the beginning as we were developing this that a darker color would work better, but we found it actually to be the exact opposite. The iron acetate for the background color, followed by neutral or nutmeg quick coat, burnished in with steel wool. So this panel started out at basically the third step on the done panel. So once you apply it, it's important to let it set up. So while Chuck is letting that set up, we have some video up here of this process that we've done off-site. And so this is the actual iron acetate application at our training center in LA. And so he chose to do it by hand. Typically I'd put the paint applicator on a pole. I like to stand up as much as I can. But that's the iron acetate going down, and that's what develops that dark color that you see in the second step of the demo panel. So this again is just iron acetate application. I believe that first one was on red oak. This one is on white oak. And on white oak, there is a much more immediate and darker reaction that occurs. There's no set ratio for it. I generally make a gallon at a time or more, several steel wool pads. Some people think you have, straight vinegar to make it, and then you can always cut the color down with water or vinegar. Some people will do 2 pads in 1 gallon for 5 hours to get a lighter effect. I personally like to let it sit for a few days and the reaction kind of maxes out, and then I'll use water or vinegar to cut the ratio back down to create a lighter effect. And it doesn't cut the same as other colors do. You really have to cut it with a significant amount of water or vinegar to get a lighter effect. If you just cut it 1-to-1, generally the color doesn't change at all, because we're dealing with chemical reaction rather than a dye. So the stain application section, it's important to make sure that the floor is dry and free of debris. apply the penetrating finish. Like I said, we recommend neutral or nutmeg. You want to let that penetrate for 10 or 15 minutes and then burnish it in with number 2 steel wool. You'd allow ample dry time at that point, generally overnight before proceeding with the white. So this is the stain application. Here, this is again at our training center in LA. Here we're applying it with a paint applicator and we'll burnish it in the next video here. You can see we did it on raw wood and on the iron acetate because you can create a cerused effect even without the iron acetate background. It just is a much more mild effect. It's very subtle. And here we're burnishing it in with the steel wool. A lot of times the question comes up, how long do you need to burnish it for? Running the buffer over it relatively quickly burnishes it. You can feel immediately how smooth it is. It'll tend to be much smoother than really any finish that you can do because you're burnishing the fibers of the wood. And under the buffer, you're actually creating a slurry of the quick coat and wood dust. And much like the filler from many years ago, the wood dust and quick coat creates a slurry that you're actually pushing back down into the wood. So you're reinforcing any pores in the wood with the wood itself, thus creating a perfectly smooth surface. And here we're just toweling off after we burnish it in, and that's to remove any excess stain. You'd proceed across the floor with those steps: application, burnish, and removal of excess. So the country white, again, ensure the floor is dry and free of debris. Apply the country white as Chuck just showed. We recommend buffing it with a red or a tan pad. Seems to be the perfect balance where it has some abrasive quality to it without actually having any grit on it. It leaves just the right amount behind. And you give that about 10 to 15 minutes dry time. We're going to push it a little bit today before you clean it. So we're going to show these next steps while we let that dry for a few more minutes. There is yours truly doing the edges with country white. No need to see that any longer than necessary. And the middle done with the buffer. Oh, go ahead. This particular one, that's on red oak there. So there is a different effect between the red oak and the white oak. On white oak, you'll have a much more consistent effect. On red oak, it'll be more varied. You'll get boards that go black and some that stay almost the natural color. And so after that, we clean the floor. Again, you want to make sure that the country white is set up, and it's not letting it dry fully. We're not talking 2 hours, 6 hours overnight. This is just 10 or 15 minutes before we clean it. So we lightly dampen a rag with mineral spirits and put it under the buffer pad, and then you can buff it off, doing the edges by hand again. Good. And so here we are buffing off. And finishing. So once you put that much effort in the floor, our burnish system, after 2 coats of different color, the floor is technically finished. That would be our commercial system that's been around for many, many years and is still used in restaurants and other commercial establishments. But in most residences, they're going to want a clear finish on it. And so the only thing we can recommend is 2-component max. You would let the cleaned white stain dry overnight, and then lightly abrade it with a maroon pad just to add a little bit of a scratch for adhesion purposes. Then you could proceed with 2 coats of finish. And there you see the end result. So we'll go ahead and start cleaning this up. Chuck's going to put a little bit of mineral spirits on the rag. And again, normally this would be done with a buffer. While Chuck's working on that, does anybody have any questions about the process that we've been talking about? Yes, sir. The only thing we can recommend is 2-component water-based Clear Max. No, so that's a great question. Can the steel wool fibers from the original solution react with it? And so theoretically that is possible, and I have seen on other types of process where they get that. We recommend the pre-made steel wool pads where it's not the rolled steel wool, they're pre-made. They shed an extraordinary amount less than the rolls of steel wool. Like when I started 22 years ago, we used to make our own pads out of the steel wool, and those would shed a lot. Those I wouldn't recommend, but with the pre-made steel wool pads, they're closer to a maroon pad, they're kind of woven, and they don't shed as much. And you'd want to be very careful to strain your solution before you put it on the floor to remove any metal particles, and then vacuum and tack carefully to remove any remaining particles. For adhesion purposes, yes sir. 2-component water has better adhesion than oil. Any other questions about that process? Yeah.
What about the steel wool for your solution? Do you have to do anything to prepare that?
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
Do you have to do anything to the steel wool to prepare it for your solution?
Great question by Arian. So when you're making your initial iron acetate solution, sometimes the steel wool that you get will come coated with either oil or even like a shellac on it. And they do that to prevent rusting during shipping because a lot of it's made overseas and so it can rust and nobody wants to use rusty steel wool. So it's a good idea to wash your steel wool when you make the solution. Lacquer thinner works well for that. And you can just, wearing gloves, pour it a little bit through your hand, squeeze it out, and then you could put it into your vinegar solution. So the question was, does the iron acetate make the grain raise? And yes, absolutely. It pops the grain similarly to water popping, sometimes even more so. But because we're following it up with the burnish, it ends up smooth as can be. It's really glass smooth after you do the burnish system. And there we have the cleaned white. So from there you would let that dry overnight and then you could proceed with maroon pad and put 2 coats of DuraClear Max on it. I believe this was done with our Flat Max if I'm not mistaken. And so the sheen on our Flat Max is a 2. So it's an extremely flat finish that yields a really nice result with the cerusing. Any other questions on process? Yes. I'm sorry?
Why did that turn out so 4 point?
It's from not buffing it because we're doing it by hand. It's very bold. Yeah, and the finish does dampen the white effect a little bit when you put the finish on it. If you look at this close, you'll see some cloudiness to it still. When you put the finish on, you really don't see the cloudiness, but it does dampen the hard white contrast a little bit. I'm sorry? The vinegar you don't wipe off. You just apply it and overnight dry time generally before you proceed. Yeah. You could check with a moisture meter. Most of vinegar is water. And so you can check with a moisture meter, but overnight is pretty safe. I wouldn't push it, to an hour or 2.
How hard or easy it is to make a batch of, prepare a board?
To prepare the iron
To
acetate?
prepare a board when you don't, let's say you don't have the iron acid that you started with.
Yeah.
I don't know, a year from when the job is.
Sure. You'd want to make bigger batches of iron acetate. Like I said, I made a gallon or even 5 gallons at a time, and that's what I would use for quite a while. But if you let the steel wool sit in the vinegar for a while, it kind of maxes out the reaction, and I think it's a safer way than going, like I said, 2 or 3 pads for 5 hours to create a lighter color. You can always back the darkness off, but you can't make it darker without letting the reaction occur again. Does anybody have any questions for Rachel? Oh, go ahead.
Can you store the iron acetate after you've made it, or is it?
Yes, I have some in my shop at home that's about 5 years old at this point, and I just took it to a school and used it a few months ago. So absolutely, it stores. It will change color. When you first make it, it'll be mostly clear, and as it ages, it actually gets darker and darker, like apple juice color, but it doesn't change the reaction that it does. Well, all right. Thank you, everybody, for coming out, and have a great show. Thanks.